Let's continue my interview with Professor Victor Davis Hanson. This is the third segment and the last segment, but not the least. Professor Hanson focused on the threat to the United States by both the leftist ideology and the Chinese Communist Party. So I asked him which one poses the most threat. So, you wanted to watch until the end. And in the previous episode, Victor Hanson dissected the FBI raid. When asked why the FBI became so political, Professor Hanson explained that he believes it's because of the top leaders in the agency aligning themselves with the left agenda. And he said not only in the FBI, but also in the Pentagon and the CIA. So this segment starts with my question to Professor Hanson, asking him to elaborate.
We could have the same discussion about the Pentagon. So this week, New York is right. The New Yorker magazine has an article on the generals that work for Trump, and Mark Milley comes out as a hero, and all of a sudden we find that he wrote a resignation letter. Of course, we don't know when he wrote it. He never turned it in. He never resigned. He's still the chair. So here is the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs as a star of this show with his resignation letter blasting Trump. But he never sent it. We don't even know when he wrote it. And then the article goes on praising all of these other generals that did what? They deliberately tried to disobey a presidential order, and they resisted him. So you have the chairman of the Joint Chiefs who went so far as to say, I don't believe that Donald Trump is stable. He might do something preemptive. And of course, when Milley is saying this, the left is also saying that Trump is an isolationist, that he doesn't get involved overseas. He doesn't want to cause necessary conflicts. He doesn't want to deter our enemies. Well, Milley says, oh no, he's too dangerous. I diagnosed him. So I'm going to call the People's Liberation Army counterpart and warn him that if Donald Trump sends me an order, and if I, Mark Milley, interpret that as possibly involving a war or nuclear weapons, I'm going to first warn the communist Chinese that I'm not going to obey that order. Well, that's treason and disobedience. And yet he was praised all through the media for that. Now, what do the communist Chinese do? They think to themselves the following: these people are really crazy. If I did that, if Chairman Xi called me, if I thought he was going to hurt Taiwan, I would call my Taiwanese, I would be shot. Anybody would be shot. So when they look at that, they don't think, wow, that's such a wonderful country. They have all of these independent thinkers that are worried about us. No, they think the following: these people are nuts. They're crazy, they're weak, they're decadent, they're in decline. They're so scared of us that they even will disobey their own president. And therefore, in the future, if we want to bully Taiwan or talk, they won't do anything. And so that's the effects of these things. And that's just not the only thing he did. Remember, he did a lot of other things. He had a photo op with the president at every chairman, and he went out and apologized and said he shouldn't have done it. And he's a hero on the left because he disobeys and he attacks the former president. If you're in China and you say that a top Chinese, if you say that Xi is a coward, is a Nazi, is an architect of Auschwitz, if he's Hitler-like, you're going to be in big trouble. Our retired officers are praised for that. So when China looks at that, they don't say, wow, I really respect these free expression. They said, well, the Americans, they just don't want to, they're not like they used to be. They're not very fearful people. We should have no problem with them. They're fighting with each other. They attack their own president. They freelance. We can get to any of these people. All they want to do is rotate into the corporate world. And we have so many joint ventures and Chinese companies Lynn Cheney is the hero of the left. We find out that her husband repeatedly is a lawyer whose firm is working with a Chinese joint venture, and it's everywhere, Chinese money. So they have very little respect for us, and it's just a question now when they make a foreign policy decision. It's not what we're going to do, it's what is in a cost benefit analysis in their interest. So when they look at Taiwan, they don't think, oh my God, if we were to try to take Taiwan, the Seventh Fleet would sink us. They probably think, well, let's see how much it would cost to take Taiwan versus blockading Taiwan versus embargoing Taiwan versus getting agents inside Taiwan versus buying off the Taiwanese government or the business community. And that's how they'll make their decision. But it won't be based on fear of a military response on the part of the United States. It's a very dangerous moment, and the Chinese know it right now. And so they're doing things that are very dangerous. And whether they go into Taiwan, again, depends on, they're looking around the world now. They look at what happened in Afghanistan. They look at our generals. They look at social justice warriors, woke, and they have determined that the United States military cannot stop them. Then they look at Russia and they think, well, Russia lost Kiev almost, but now they are deadlocked, and the world said they were going to bankrupt Putin, but he's surviving the global sanctions, and we are buying his oil, and India is, and he's doing okay. So they say to themselves, well, if we want to take Taiwan, we could probably survive a global buyout. We have so many foreign leaders, business leaders, commercial leaders, investors in Europe, the United States, and Japan that we have in our pocket, that they wouldn't enforce a boycott. So we probably would be okay. And so I think what they're going to do is they're going to slowly over this year and next start to intercept ships and harass them that go to Taiwan, commercial ships, flights, make it very expensive. They will probably tell countries that trade with Taiwan that, you're not going to be able to have joint ventures with us. They're probably going to harass the Taiwanese military a lot more. And the point is, they're going to squeeze Taiwan so that people say, you know what, if I'm a tourist, I don't want to go to Taiwan. I don't know what might happen. A Chinese missile might go over. Or if I'm a cruise ship, I don't want to dock in Taiwan. Or if I have a business, I do not want to partner with the Taiwanese. And then they'll probably tell Taiwanese, you have a joint venture with us, you can have 5 of them. But, and then people who don't, they'll say, you know what, you're an enemy of the Chinese people. So they have a lot of ways of doing things other than just invading Taiwan. And then when they feel they've weakened it successfully, then they'll probably invade. But that won't be until they have succeeded in bankrupting the country or isolating it completely.
Professor Hanson mentioned the Chinese money and the Chinese Communist Party's influence operations in the United States. What kind of threat does it bring?
When you look at China and Russia and you're an American, Russia has 140 million people. China has 1.4 billion. Any empirical person would say there's 330,000 students here from communist China. There's none really from Russia. They have violated copyright patents, dumped product below the cost of production, manipulated. Russia doesn't have that influence. They would say the Chinese military is much greater and more deadly than the Russian military. Then they would say Russia's GDP is a fraction of China. China's got 9 times the population, the same territory almost. So China is much more powerful and dangerous than Russia. And yet this country obsessed over Russia collusion, Russia this, and Russia really didn't collude in the election. Not that they wouldn't have if they thought it was in their interest, but they didn't. China does all sorts of things. It's got its tentacles everywhere. As I said before, I work at Stanford University. It was fined for not reporting $50 million in illicit Chinese contributions. We know that a member of the Chinese military was a visiting professor on the Stanford campus. So that's just every day. The question is, how does China deal with that, and how do we deal with it? And the way that China does, it has a sophisticated propaganda because there's so many people from mainland China here, and there's so much American investment in China and so much more, whether it's the NBA or the Hollywood. So if China says, I don't want dark-skinned actors in your movies that you produce in Hollywood, then they don't do it. Or if China says, these Americans are so woke, I'm going to say, don't treat us like you treat George Floyd. That's what they said the other day. And you are racist. You are racist. We're not white people. You're racist. And so the left sees China as, even though it's one of the most powerful, racist, segregated, oppressive societies in the world, mainland China, they say, you know what? There's certain elements of it that we kind of like. We like the idea that maybe it went too far, but, you know, in college I wore a Red Star Mao hat, and, you know, one of Obama's PR person said her hero was Mao Zedong. Nobody says their hero is Stalin. They all say their hero is Mao. Mao killed three times as many people as Stalin did. But there's a romance with communist China. There's a romance that Chinese are not white, so to speak, in the left-wing mind. They look at Russia, and there's none of that. So they fixate on Russia, and the Chinese know that. And their propaganda is post-George Floyd woke. So every time you want to criticize China, this huge juggernaut of oppressive government, they claim they're victim. Oh my God, you're racist. Oh my God, you're colonials. Oh my God, you're neo-colonials. Oh my God, you're imperialists. Oh my God, you're doing to us what you did to George Floyd. And it works. And they get shielded for the things they do. No NBA player says, I want to have a franchise in Russia. They all have franchises in China. And you tell them, well, the Chinese coaches beat their players. They discriminate on who plays by race. They're trying to take over your entire operation in China, and they will once they master. They don't care. And so that's what's so scary about the mainland Chinese, the communists. Think about it. Nancy Pelosi's husband has investments in China. Dianne Feinstein's chauffeur for 20 years was a Chinese spy. Dianne Feinstein's late husband was worth $1 billion. He had hundreds of $millions of investments. Mike Bloomberg, one of the richest men in the world, he's got billions of dollars investments in China. Joe Biden's son flew on Air Force Two when he was vice president to do business. Joe Biden called his son, we know that, on a phone call and said, you have nothing to worry about when a Chinese actor was arrested and might have contaminated the Bidens in his skullduggery. So they have their hooks into the highest levels of American politics and corporate people. And it's very lucrative. I mean, Hunter Biden, as we speak, is renting a $20,000 a month Malibu beach house. Where do you get that money? He's a crackhead. He's a drug addict. He's unemployed. Where does he get that kind of money? Where did Joe Biden get 3 big homes? Where do these people, and the Chinese know that. And so we know what they do, and they influence public opinion at the highest levels, especially left-wing politicians. Right-wing corporate people they do, conservative, of course, but they've had problems with Republican officials because they have a tradition of supporting Taiwan. And that's just a fact. And in the left-wing mind, Taiwan is a right-wing renegade state that broke away from Mao's cultural paradise. And then it had a bunch of right-wing dictators. And they're just an irritant. They're not worth it. They can get us into a war. And China is the future. But to the conservative, they gravitated, they evolved, they're a free state, they're a democratic society, they're worth defending. And that's the difference.
So, which one poses the biggest threat to the United States, the leftist ideology or the Chinese Communist Party?
As strong as Beijing is, it doesn't have the power to defeat the United States. It just doesn't have it. And it doesn't have it because in education, all of the major scientific research in the world is conducted by American and European universities. They have good universities, but not yet anywhere near us. Their military, for all of their size, it's not able to. If we go to help Taiwan, there'll be a big fight. If the Chinese Navy goes into the Caribbean, it'll be blown out of the water. So they don't have the reach that we do. We have 6,500 nuclear weapons. They don't have that yet. We have a lot more oil and coal and natural gas than China does. We have double the GDP. We have 4 times the per capita income. So we have all these advantages. But if we allow them to bribe or infiltrate our elites as they're doing, and we're so obsessed with race and all of these domestic left issues, then yeah, they're going to be able to become the world's hegemon. The only person that can stop them are the United States. The only country that can stop them, it's not Europe, it's not Japan, it's the United States. The United States, if they were strong domestically and they got their financial house in order, they could get the Europeans, the Australians, the Japanese, the Taiwanese, the South Koreans, all of them. They get them all together, and they could stop Chinese expansionism. But if they don't, then countries like India, or for example, or Indonesia, they look at China and they think, you know what, we don't like those guys, they're dangerous, but the Americans will get you into trouble. They'll talk tough, but they won't support you, and they're losing. We better join the winners, which are the Chinese. So that's the danger. If you have 4 more years of a leftist government in the United States, I'm very worried. If Biden, I'm very worried about the next 2 years. We've destroyed the country almost. We have no energy. We're not using our energy. The streets are unsafe. Crime is out of control. Racial relations are the worst. The law is not being applied. You can walk into a major city and walk down the street and club somebody to death, and if you're a particular race or ideology, they're not going to do anything to you. It's just a fact. You can go into a pharmacy and walk out with $900 worth of stuff. They're not going to arrest you. That's never happened before. So that's what leftist ideology has done. It's kind of like Mao's Cultural Revolution.
And my understanding from you, maybe but the more immediate threat is the leftist ideology to the United States, but ultimately it is the threat from the CCP.
Yeah, I think so. And the left in the United States is either not willing to or incapable of deterring China. They're just not going to do it. They either like China, or they are afraid of China, or they don't want to spend the time or money on it. But whatever the reason is, they will not deter China. They'll never do it. And so
Miles said, because of what they've done in the Trump administration, the U.S., China, some of the policies and strategy, they actually had to, most of it being inherited by the current administration. What do you think?
You mean the Trump policies are
to China
still in effect by the Biden administration? Yeah. Well, they say they are, but I just have to look at what they've done. The first meeting they had with them was in Anchorage, Alaska in 2021. I think it was in March, and the Chinese just dressed down the American. Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan just said, we're not going to listen to you. Look at your country, your race, and they just took it. And then they never talked this way about Taiwan during the Trump administration. I've never in my entire life heard a Chinese official say, we can take Taiwan anytime we want. And they're saying that constantly now. I've never heard that before. And so why are they saying and doing that now? I don't know, but they don't seem to have any fear or respect for the United States. The only thing that's changed is the old Bill Clinton, George Bush attitude that the more you appease China, the more you invest in China, the more you bring Chinese students to the United States, the more they get impressed with you, and the more they'll like you, and the more that their kids will come home and they'll have sneakers and listen to rap music and they'll change China. Nobody believes that anymore. The more that you have contact with them, the more they hate you, the more they have contempt for you, the more they'll steal everything you have, and then they'll think you deserve it because you let them do it. And that's just their attitude. When they can steal from the West, medical research, computer research, and they get away with it, or when they have asymmetrical trade, or they dump products, or they manipulate their currency and they get away with it, they think, these stupid people, we would never allow them to do it. And they have contempt. So that's how they operate. That's how a communist mind works. And they're still run by communists.